You drop the kids off right there and listen to Tri-City Sports Now with me, Marky Billson, your voice of choice for a new generation of Tri-City sports fans. Hey, the name of the program is Tri-City Sports Now. We own the Tri-Cities on 1420 WEMB Sports Radio because I generally have the best guests, hardest hitting opinions in the market. On today's program, I haven't really gone into race week probably as much as we should have. Saturday night race, the schedule's moved up. Truck Series playoff begins now. And, of course, tomorrow we'll talk to Jerry Bonkowski of NBCSports.com, Sirius, a little bit about what's going on there. Hope to possibly have another NASCAR-related guest, but today's show, did you know that there is actually a Tennessee team playing for a championship? Now, it isn't a local Tennessee team, so that makes it, you didn't see people dancing the streets when Vanderbilt won the College World Series. Maybe they did in Nashville, but they didn't around here. And save for our old friend the Trooper, Andy Slagle, or so. Maybe I don't know. But no, you've got that. But there is a team called the Middle Tennessee Bulldogs, and they're in something called the the Developmental Gridiron Football League. Is it Developmental Gridiron League? It's based in Tennessee. It's based out in Memphis, actually. And yes, I know. Well, that means it's not based in Tennessee if it's out in Memphis, right? No, I get it. I really do. But circumstance is that there's a team playing for a title. And Maria Trues, the station CEO, she met a man named Mark Pilling, who happens to be the coach of the team that Middle Tennessee beat en route to get to the championship game. Semi-pro football, I've often thought, might be the truest sport of our times, because you're talking about, first of all, football, usually hard-hitting football. Players aren't paid. Players are not paid. And you're getting a situation. If you remember the Mountain Empire Warriors, when ETSU didn't have football, tried to get that to go. And regardless, the players are not paid. It's tough to get publicity. They play in the middle of summer, this sort of thing. And so it can be difficult to get a lot of attention. I used to cover it for newspaper articles that were probably ignored. In the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, covering the semi-pro scene in Pittsburgh, which was still, although it didn't have a real big fan base, it was enough that it could put in a player into the NFL. That sort of thing. There are tryouts in this developmental league. But I want to just add how difficult it is to have such a team in this era to really try to make it count. Now, when I talk about the Tri-Cities becoming more cosmopolitan in their, sports, I'm thinking about, obviously, not ever going to be big enough to have an NFL team or something like this around here. Unless somehow growth happens, and it's going the other way right now, despite what Appalachian Highlands might bring, or so, yeah, that'll last. And if it does last, it's sad. If that will actually stick. But anyway, what you'll get is a situation where, possibly though there are things that this area could support that we're not having right now. Instead of the old Appalachian League, a AA baseball franchise, like what they have in Sevierville. In case of, let's just say, I've long suggested that a new arena around here would be beneficial to everyone, because you could have not just ETSU with a new arena and drawing bigger crowds than ever and regaining national prominence that they had in 1991, but you build the floor big enough, you put a hockey team in there, or indoor football. We just had the Arena Football Championship game, I guess it was Arena Bowl 32 in Albany. Albany Empire won. I was thinking actually today, although arena football, you talk about, because it's race week, and nobody's really talking about the race in Bristol. I'm sorry. It's just not that compelling anymore. This is not 20 years ago. And yeah, I mean, you start thinking about the history of it and Earnhardt and Labonte and that rivalry that was out there. And that was discussed about 2 weeks ago in the local papers, and now it's just sort of, who's going, will Jimmy Johnson get into the playoff field? Well, what if he does? He's not going to win his 8th championship. Not this year. Sound like I'm about ready to fight Roddy Piper. The circumstances is just that it's not as big. And so now we start looking and saying, okay, let's start thinking about what else is out there, but also developing football players. Because this area, we've got 2 football players in the NFL right now. Dan Kilgore, Miami Dolphins lineman, Jason Witten, who's also a lineman, tight end. But that's all we got. And why are the players not being developed the way they are elsewhere? Do want to talk a little bit about ETSU to begin. Yeah, favorite subject, right? And I want to tip my cap to them a little bit. The culture at ETSU is one of winning. And it didn't used to be that way. I mean, let's face fact, it used to be that ETSU was synonymous with losing. Bucs football team, it's coming off their first conference title in 37 seasons. If not for a Quay Holmes fumble at the goal line, maybe the Buccaneers would have beaten FCS powerhouse, Jacksonville State on the road in the football playoffs last year. I don't know how far they could have gone, but they got a pretty good defense this year, and they would add that most of those players on last year's team, plus Dylan Weigel. Men's basketball team, they are doing pretty well. They've won 100 games the last 4 years. That's a school record. And, perhaps you'd like more postseason success during this time, postseason tournament victory. I get that. Questions do continue about Patrick Good, his hip injury. He's not playing over in Europe. But the Buccaneers figure to be the preseason pick for the 2020 SoCon men's basketball title. Now we can discuss the baseball team, which has now improved as well under Joe Panucci. Did they get there because easy scheduling, getting fat, and the non-conference scheduling? We can discuss that. I would say yes. However, this team had beaten Tennessee 3 out of 5 times last 2 years. Not bad there either. And I mean, so much of ETSU success. I mean, this is the one thing you can say, hey, baseball team's taken 3 of 5 from Tennessee. Well, maybe they're not so subservient to the Vols. Women's basketball, bad year last year. No way around it. Before that, 4 straight winning seasons. And this is a big change from the old ETSU, which historically, like I said, big culture of losing. I've talked about this. I moved to Tennessee. I was 15 years old, 1986. Football team was coming off a losing season. Basketball team was about ready to go 7-21. That year, ETSU went to NC State early on. I was excited about it. I was an NC State fan. They lost by 19. Turn on the 11 o'clock news. The feeling is, look how good the Buccaneers played. They only lost to NC State by 19 points. You don't want to know what they lost to the North Carolina Tar Heels that year by. You really do not want to know. But at that time, ETSU, they'd lose their football coach to a D2 school. That was what Wofford was, Now, instead of being that cheap, basketball team gets to take a tour of Europe. That's quite the change. Now, admittedly, mid-'80s, that's ancient history, but let's talk a little bit more recently, the previous decade, the Atlantic Sun era, the David Mullins era. I will never forget David Mullins saying to the public that 2007 was the greatest year in the history of East Tennessee State athletics. Now, to remind you about what happened in 2007, there was no football. No, the basketball team did not make the NCAAs. Benefit of hindsight, we know this now, is that the tennis coach was a thief. I mean, and when Mullins would come on talk shows and say, this was the greatest year in Buccaneer history, no one would challenge him. That's what really disturbed me. Nobody ever challenged that notion. And he would repeat it. All he was bragging on was an all-sports trophy, and a track team evidently did well or something. A all-sports trophy in a remedial conference, and he was trying to say the times were better then than, let's say, when ETSU had a nationally prominent basketball program in 1991. And nobody would call him out and say, are you serious here? Where ETSU is in the worst conference they've ever been in. Atlantic Sun. What this did is it established a culture at ETSU of disingenuousness. Okay? And it's one of the reasons when Mullins, when Paul Stanton, president, left, ETSU fans just as quickly as they could have brought in Attila the Hun, and they would have just embraced him. It didn't matter who they could have brought, and all this. And then it turned out that those guys turned the Buccaneers around. What? Bring back football? Southern Conference? Winning games? Yes, please. A new football stadium was even built. And guess what? Unlike the previous regime, that first season at the stadium that should be named after John Robert Bell, you didn't have to bring your own lawn chairs and blankets to watch the game. Imagine that. So different than when the previous regime built a baseball park or a softball stadium and all just said, well, we've never done this before. Soccer field, the seats weren't done first year. But I do have to ask this, is there a new kind of disingenuousness at ETSU? One that I would call out of the Baron von Raschke type of mindset. That is all the people need to know. It's a pretty bad Baron von Raschke impersonation. He's still alive. He's doing well, as a matter of fact. Glad to hear it. He's an old-time pro wrestler. Okay. It's 2 weeks away from the Bucs' first football game. They still have last year's roster up on the ETSUBucks.com website. According to that website, Logan Marchie and Austin Herink are still on the team. Now, just keep this in mind. The info that Marchie was no longer on the Buccaneers was released only after Joe Avento of the Johnson City Press prodded Bucs head coach Randy Sanders for an answer at an off-season press conference. And the news that Tyreek Sandusky was no longer on the team reportedly was released only when Jacob Sailors, a running back, said so during an interview. I mean, what's going on here? Now, it's understandable that some coaches' personality will be more revealing than others, okay? Randy Sanders is not Mike Leach. We get it, okay? But instead of building off the most momentum the football program has had in a generation, it seems like ETSU wishes to suppress info that will continue the buzz about the football program. And it's not limited to the football program. Take, basketball, and I'll mention this. I hate it when I do, but we have to. Injury status of Mladen Armas and Jerome Rodriguez was kept so secret prior to the Buccaneers' eventual season finale against Wisconsin Green Bay in the CIT. Those two players were actually listed as starters in a game they would not participate in at all. That's not gamesmanship. That's disingenuousness. And it's time for it to stop at ETSU. There's a lot of good in the new, but you know what? There's still a lot of the old that's still around. Hey, I'm Marky Billson. When we come back, we're going to tell you, where does Jared Guarantano rank as a pro prospect? That's right. Tri-City Sports Now will be coming back after this.
For Asian House, home of the happy.